Welcome to Tyrompers No Limits Podcast. What is going on, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you so much for tuning in to Tyrompers No Limits Podcast, episode number 68. We got the man in the house today that I've been fired up to talk to. This is our brother, Dr. Drew. He focuses on the performance of ADHD leaders, turning distractions into focused fulfillment. I'm pretty ADD myself, so I'm looking to get some tips from this man today. Welcome to the podcast, Mr. Dr. Drew.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for the invitation, Tyler. This is going to be a really great discussion.
Thank you, man. Well, dude, for anybody, I'd assume a lot of people that probably follow me, you're big on the Twitter space too, in the streets every day out there putting out fire content. But maybe for anybody who doesn't know you, can you just give a quick recap who you are, what you're about, my man?
Yeah, so, I am spent the last 15 years helping professionals, entrepreneurs, and athletes learn to pay attention, lean into what they care about, and live with a sense of integrity. And so I have a background in clinical neuroscience, as well as consulting in organizations, as well as being a business owner and nonprofit leader myself. So I bring all those things together and I try to make things accessible for people so you can understand what actually works for people. You don't have to buy into hacks. You don't have to do stuff that is just random, but you can blend the science with art and actually make it work for people. And so my heart is to help as many people as possible, show up for their lives in big new ways. And I think when you combine all these things together, people can live an entirely connected way. I think the way that we're supposed to live, actually engaged in our lives. And so that's what I try to do.
And that's pretty awesome, brother. Lot to unpack there. Okay, so let's go back to early Dr. Drew, before we were Dr. Drew, right? Tell me a little about your childhood growing up. Did you always kind of have a heart to help people, or how did you get into the fields that you're in? And by the way, you do a lot, brother.
I do a lot, but I also like to live a lot. Yeah, so I grew up in rural Texas, in a little place, farming community, and I was ADHD-ish myself. We didn't have that where I came from. I grew up 30 years ago, and we weren't talking about ADHD, especially not in a farm town. But I was always kind of distracted, but I always loved people. I loved being in the mix of stuff. Even when I was getting in trouble, getting sent to the principal's office, I just really wanted to be around people so much. But again, we actually didn't have much of a psychology background at that point, but I definitely loved helping people. At the time, I was really connected with my faith community and in a religious tradition. And they were like, you're so good with people and you're so all over the place. You should go out and be a youth pastor. And actually, that was my first career, and helping people in that particular way. But the thing I actually really loved was that one-on-one connection, being with people and helping them grow. And so that's how I kind of transformed into the psychology career. That's what moved into the Dr. Drew.
Very cool. Awesome, man. So, okay, how many years were you a youth pastor, man?
So that was my undergrad degree. I actually have an undergrad in Bible and youth ministry, and was working throughout that time and did a couple years after that, and was working on my master's of theology when I made the transition. So probably 5 or 6 years all thrown together.
That's so cool, man. So now do you kind of feel like, maybe this is a question I'm almost asking for myself, but
Yeah.
do you feel like your ADHD is almost like a superpower then, once you learn to harness it and kind of make it work for you? Or how do you help clients, I guess, around that now?
Yeah, and I love that you voiced it in that way. I think so many people view it as a battle, and I think it is a battle if you don't know how to know yourself. So I think at the time I didn't really know how to focus myself and use the tools that I need, but it absolutely can be a superpower because it gives you, I think, an increased energy, but also a different perspective. I'm able to make a lot more connections, I think, with it because my mind is always running at a different speeds and at different angles. But it's just being able to take a step back and slow yourself down so that you can see the possibilities. And more importantly, I can communicate them to you, because one thing that I never realized that I didn't do well until the Twitter space was oh, you're not being able to pick up all the ideas from my head, from the words that I'm using, even though I can see it really clearly. There were some gaps that I missed. So I think that was the made switch for me, and even working with my patients, of like, how do I slow you guys down enough so that you can make your world, which is really beautiful and like imaginative and creative, come alive in the real space, and not get so distracted by all the other stuff first. So
And I resonate with that so much. Even the first few years of marriage for me and my wife, she used to joke, and it still kind of does, like, you're just everywhere. You've got a new idea every minute, and I can't keep up with where you're going. And so try to slow myself down a lot. It's I would say a constant battle, so to speak. But I also agree with you where, dude, I can play 24 games of higher stakes poker at a time. There's not many people on the planet that can do that, right? Like,
yeah.
and I can be like doing other things on the side. Like I feel like it is kind of a superpower once you learn to harness that. So walk me through, like, when you're getting your PhD and you're starting to learn a lot of this stuff about yourself. Does a lot of the stuff that you now teach, did you teach yourself first? You kind of started to learn and then talk about that transition in with patients and what it's like now.
Yeah. So it's been a very iterative process. First, learning what works for me, and then being able to like design that, figure out why that works. So like, okay, I know like slowing myself down, I know creating a way to organize myself is really helpful. Okay, so why does that work? So I would go back into the literature and say, okay, here's what the scientific literature is saying about these things. All right, if you have ADHD, you need a certain level of stimulation to actually be effective. If you have too much, you go crazy. If you have too little, you also go. So you need to find this optimum zone place. And there's actually a robust literature about that. Similarly, I was also at the same time like engaging in new topics. I got really big into clinical neuroscience, in particular, what happens when your brain gets injured. I participated in many studies, from like the NFL study, as well as studies with veterans who were wounded in combat. What happens to the front parts of your brain when those get injured? And from those perspectives, I was able to learn our brain is really organized around connecting with other people. And when we do that, when we slow down and we are able to have some perspective, actually all the attentional processes make sense. We don't just attend just randomly. You always are attending to something for a reason. And our biological predisposition is to organize around threat. So we're always looking for some kind of threat in the environment. And if we, especially from an ADHD person, like, we're just really good at that. We see lots of them all the time. And so, but the way we get around that is through care. So what our front part of the brain is designed for: selecting, optimizing, and inhibiting responses in the environment so we can appropriately select what target we need to move for. But the way that care works is we are saying, okay, in this moment, we're inhibiting our response to take care of ourselves, but we're looking for the rest of our groups. And so as we grow our empathy, as we grow our ability to protect and serve other people, actually our attention gets more focused and we get more pro-social in our ability to take care of all the people around us, and including ourselves. And so that was a huge leap for me.
Wow, man, that wouldn't be intuitive for me either. Like, if I'm thinking about it, I would think, how do I solve my ADD? And then really saying is outwardly, right? Like, look to serve, look to. I really think that I made that self-discovery maybe 10 years ago when I tried to make myself really happy by buying myself things and drinking parties and all these things, right? And then I kind of realized, man, I'm actually most happy. It's counterintuitive, but when I'm giving to others, when I'm serving others. And it seems like the same principle really applies. And you found that out in a lot of your studies and work, man. That's really interesting to me.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I was like, why do I have some veterans who come home, they're wounded, like normally they're perseverating the same thing, like they just bought lots of stuff, or they, can't organize around like just taking care of their basic needs, but yet like they can take care of their family. They'll go out and they'll do work. Same way, like, why do some people who have even dementia, like literally the parts of their brain are decreasing, but like if you give them memories of their loved ones, if you give them ways to connect in with social groups, like they come alive in completely new ways and they start acting like their old selves again. And it's this capacity that we have to care. And actually the way we were evolved, created, whatever language you want to put around it, like to be with each other. We're social critters and we need each other to regulate. And I think one of the things that I know we get wrong in the medical field is everything tends to be individualized on one person. And we say, like, I'm going to work with you this one time, this one way, and we're going to focus on your problems. And then often it becomes like the self-fulfilling prophecy of like, oh, I just have problems all the time. Yes, you have problems.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, man. So I have a brother-in-law who's a physician too, and he has this thing where he told me this a couple of years back, and it kind of blew my mind. And I thought about it a lot where you were just saying that is he says, we're all connected, man. And, like human beings, we're all connected. And then I kind of have this thing, man, it's my pinned tweet, right? Like if I want to feel better, I need to go make other people's day, right? And it sounds like you've kind of solved almost like that through the ADD lens almost of like, hey, man, if you really need to slow things down, focus on others, get outside of self, right? Is there any pushback against that? Like in medical field, do they say that? Because I don't know, I get called sometimes like you're toxically positive, right? Like that doesn't work. Like people say this stuff to me a lot, and I'm like, well, it works for me and a lot of the people around me, but I don't know. Do you have any pushback against that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think there is pushback on different levels from different camps. I think the medical system is designed around single payer, single transaction service. So like you have a problem, my job is to fix it. Which is really ironic because like from mental health, like literally day one of my psychology program, I was told you can't change people.
You
Like
can't?
you cannot. Like a psychologist cannot change another human. Like
Okay.
that's not our job. Like
Okay.
and we can like put some stuff in your path and we can help you like get some tools, but you have to choose whether or not you want to change to begin with. So like that fundamental like difference is like, oh, okay, well, my job then is to like create an us so that we go out and do something different together. And so there's that space, but there's another space where I do run into problems, and it's actually in the influencer ADHD community is where I end up having some problems, because even throwing out the idea that like, what happens if ADHD and many of the things that we call diagnoses aren't diseases? Like, what happens if they're just individual differences in how we relate to the world? Like, why do we have to call every single sadness, sorrow, pain a disease? I think if you look at all the ancient wisdom traditions, like that's how we got to know each other. That's how we got to connect. That's how we got to like solve big problems together. And so what happens if sorrow wasn't a disease?
Yeah, that's a really good point, man. Because I think that goes back to like a bigger point almost of our kind of sick care system that we deal with today, where they do just want to throw it, they want to label you and throw you on a pill and just say, hey man, that'll fix it, right? Like, but they don't really want to understand. And I'm generalizing here. I think there's
Yeah,
amazing
absolutely.
people that want to do great things, but overall. But I think, yeah, if you really get to know on an individual level, right? Like, I've been so blessed, man, to take clients that come to me and they're 60, 80 pounds overweight. And dude, in a year, they've gone from on 4 medications to 0, and just a healthier lifestyle, the food they're consuming. I think that mind body connection, that gut health, so many things I think play into a lot of these things. And even with young kids, like, look, man, I got a 2-year-old boy. He's wild. Like he's so wild. And we actually call him the big wild because he's just everywhere, right? Like I can tell early on, they will label him ADHD, right? Like he's just like I was as a kid, can't sit still for a minute. But I think like, okay, already as a parent, how do I want to go about that? And maybe you have some wisdom that you could drop on, what's the best way to deal with kids like that? Because to me, I think, dude, I tell my wife this, it's going to be a superpower for him.
Yeah. It starts with one, you're relating to them. Like if you see it as a superpower versus a problem, like he starts to see it as a superpower versus a problem. And I think he's going to have a lot of experiences in his life where people are going to tell him the way he is naturally is a problem. And so it starts early with being like, no, you are celebrated for who you are and the things that you do. Now let's learn to optimize it so that you can actually use these skills effectively. And there's tons of tools to do that. But it really does start with like believing that this kid not only can do well, can be well. Because normally what happens is you're a busy parent, you've got 1,000 things going on, you're trying really hard, you got this kid that's like everywhere all at once, and I'm stressed out, I'm trying to do stuff at work, and I'm also trying to parent. And so when I don't like the way I feel, when you're feeling the way you feel, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to punish you because I don't know how to deal with my stuff. So if you're a parent in that circumstance, your first job is like, all right, calm yourself down and like recognize that my child has some individual differences that maybe don't rub up exactly with how I like to see the world. It doesn't mean that they're wrong. So that's that first space, having space for them.
Super grateful that you said that, man. That's such a powerful point. Even looking back, I got labeled, I think, in junior high, just a bad kid. And I wasn't a bad kid, man. I loved people. I always wanted everybody to win, but like a lot of the teachers, I think, just didn't like dealing with my energy. Now, I had some great teachers, man. Shout out to Barb Socklavin if you watch this, or some of these awesome teachers. They would actually let me stand in the back. They would let me walk. They would let me bring in water. They would be okay if I was sitting there tapping and doing these things, right? Like, so I had some amazing people along the way. And I think my dad, was really good at just getting me active constantly and always being there. But I think that is a sad thing that you see. Did you experience that too then from an early age where you just kind of you're sent to the principal's office and just kind of labeled a bad kid?
Yeah, well, so I got it a little bit different. My mom was a teacher and like in a very small school. And so the first time that I actually got sent to the principal's office for bad behavior, it was very clear that that was not acceptable. And so like I think actually it was my best friend who ended up being my girlfriend, like first ever girlfriend. His name was Liz. And like I pulled her pigtail or something like that in like class because I'm like, oh, it's dancing in front of me. This is fun. And but I was so sensitive to like pain, and my mom like just kind of laid in like about all the different ways that this wasn't acceptable. But then the problem was it was like not like seen as this is not acceptable and all the other things that you're doing in your life is not acceptable. There's something wrong with your character. So I got like really deep embedded with this idea of like who I am, all these impulses I have are just like shameful and evil. And I find that a lot of kids with ADHD, when that happens, especially maybe if they have the extra religious component, which religion can be amazing and awesome spiritual like background and giving it purpose, but it also depending upon not the right context.
Totally agree, man. I went to religious like grade school and just again labeled a very bad kid at it.
Yeah, and then you get like this idea of like, oh, now I'm like being punished by God or being tormented for being who you are. And so what I ended up doing was just like checking out. I went the withdrawal and attentive type, and just like they're like, I was actually put in special needs classes and told I wasn't going to graduate high school, or told I wasn't going to graduate college. And it was in part because I'm like, well, if I do anything, like they're just gonna like get mad at me. And so I would just kind of like stare off into my own little world or stare out in the window and like imagine like these new spaces where I was gonna be okay.
Man, do you ever want to write him a letter and be like, hey, I got my PhD?
Yeah, I have a very specific like line that I play a lot. And I'm like, dear counselor who said I wasn't smart enough to go and take an AP course.
There's got to be a big level of validation for that. And now not only that, but you get to come full circle and help people kind of grow through the same things you have. So when you see a lot of adults here, Drew, do they bring a lot of those wounds with them and you're helping them kind of unlearn that, hey, you're worthy and here's some techniques, or what's the typical process look like?
Yeah. So it depends on how they're coming to me. Like either from the psychology side, I think they know often they have a wound. From like the performance side, like they're less interested in that, although we end up discovering lots of them along the way. So what typically happens is they come to me and they're like, I had this problem and I don't know why I keep coming to it. Like, and I keep, banging my head against this this thing. And one of the core things that ends up popping out is you hear like these self-doubt stories. You hear these like I'm not good enough stories, or you hear stories of like, man, like I'm not valuable. Like I just like everyone else can figure it out, but I can't. And so we start unpeeling the layers there, and even and you just hear story after story after story of a kid who like was trying his hardest to like please his parents, love people, like engage in interest, but like it just wasn't aligned with their specific family, wasn't aligned with the context. Like, um, like even my own personal story, like my school was tiny. They had like no resources, and the community didn't really understand the science at all. And so like even if they would have been able to know like, this kid's ADD, he's just a little different, like they didn't really have the resources to support that. And that's happened with so many other folks. I think about other clients that I have who grew up in actually very privileged environments, but still like they could look around like I have all this stuff and I still can't get it right. And in part it's because no one ever showed them like here actually specifically is how your brain works. And it's not that you're bad, it's just like you might need a couple different touches to figure stuff out.
Yeah, that's really well put. My wife and I have been going down a couple of rabbit holes watching TED Talks on like leading authorities and this stuff too. And one thing that really stuck out to me as a lot of teachers now, and they're starting to deal with children like this, where they're saying it's not really fair to just give you like an 80 question test and expect you to just sit there for 2 hours. And like, I remember being so stressed, I would break pencils in half. I just feel like I'm going out of my skin. I couldn't sit there for that long. So they're saying what they're doing now is just breaking it up into 8 questions. And when you finish those 8 questions, you get to get up, get a drink of water, turn it in. The teacher says, take a minute to stretch, go back, take your next 8 questions, get up. And they're finding that really helps a lot, right? And there's different strategies that they're using now and things like that. But I think, yeah, man, when we were kids, they didn't have any of that, right? You were just kind of labeled, well, this kid's like he's bouncing off the walls. What's his problem, right? So I do think that hopefully the science, and you're probably one of the leaders in that, it sounds like, is catching up, and a lot of the strategies are hopefully catching up. But I still do think there's a lot of kids that fall through.
Absolutely.
I'll just medicate them, right? Let's just, again, the parents are busy. I don't want to deal with it. The teachers have 30 other kids. I don't want to deal with it. Let's just numb this kid's brain. And then he's an adult all of a sudden, or she's an adult. And they do, there's some people have been telling me there's something wrong with me my whole life, right? So how do you help people then, I guess, get to that point where they unlearn that? Because for me, Drew, I was 35. I remember I called Zach Hommel, my coach, Zach probably, right? And I remember the first thing I told him was, dude, I'm not sure I can focus or create a business plan, or I just have too addictive of a personality, and I'm everywhere, I'm scattered. And I remember him being like, dude, you got superpowers. We just got to unlock them, and it reframed kind of for the first time in me. And I do have some powers that like other quote unquote normal people don't have. And I can utilize those if I harness them,
Absolutely. So I think it is great that you had someone who could reframe that experience for you. A lot of what the work is helping them become actually self-aware of what their strengths are and what they've accomplished to get to here. So like you are, even at that point, you were 35 and you were trying to better your life. You had a relationship at that point, you had people, but like you were looking at all the stuff you haven't done yet. Right. And what normally happens is we start and this is anyone, this isn't ADHD specific, but ADHD folks normally have like lots of different dreams and lots of different possibilities of stuff they want to do. And we're always comparing ourselves to that other thing. And so by definition, like you're always looking at your lack. You're always looking at what you don't have and what you can't accomplish, as opposed to, where you come from right? So like I have things in my life I definitely want to look at in my life, and I'm like, oh, I haven't done this yet. I haven't really created as big a business as I want and help impacted all those people that want. But if I think about like I was a kid in small town Texas who like wasn't going to graduate college or wasn't going to go to college, much less move to a PhD, much less start a business, much less all these other things. It's like, oh wow, I have done lots of stuff. So creating the awareness of what one's actually done helps you start being able to connect with us. Well, maybe I have hope for the future. So you look at your impact and then you be able to plan that more effectively for them. That's the first step. And that's how you, I think, start to build those build those strengths inside yourself to say like, oh my gosh, not only am I worth something, I can create some really cool stuff. Now it's just that, how can I harness that to be more effective? So instead of like, 35, 38 years, however long we're at right now, like how do we move that quicker? And that's through the other steps.
Nice, man. That's awesome. So if somebody is watching this and they're an adult or they're, do you take on like younger kids, or is it mostly all adults that you work with?
Yeah, so it depends on the service. For coaching, I primarily work with adults.
Yeah.
But that being said, like I do have a large background on the psychology side and the clinical side. If they're really looking specifically for ADHD strategies, I definitely do that type of work. I have a psychology assistant who does actually all the testing for me, and we can do comprehensive like learning evaluation testing, and that was a part of my background originally too. So I think it's really important to get a good sense of it, because you're absolutely right. Like one of the cool things, like if you get the skills as a teenager, you can really take off and like become like really a superstar once you know who you are.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I love the fact that you've kind of just come full circle again, and your whole life now is about helping others. And you mentioned you're on a nonprofit, and I mean, you're doing so much, man. I also know you're super fit. You're into like fitness and health and mountain climbing and all this stuff. So maybe shift gears a little and talk about your other ventures a little bit, if you don't mind, man. What's the nonprofit world like? How'd you get into that? The fitness world, and then do you think even like being super active and fit helps that mind too?
Oh, that last one is 100%. Like that's both science and my own experience. Um, being in your body is why we exist. Like often, like especially in the ADHD world, like we're just kind of trapped in our mind, but like thinking of all these different thoughts. But what connecting deep down into our roots in our body does, it's like, oh, like we can only do one thing at a time. And when we're present, like really we can be doing one thing. If I say like, even if we make a plan, and hey, let's go jump rope tomorrow. We can't do that right now because we're gonna do it tomorrow. Like we're planning to do it then. And if we jump to the future and we're tomorrow and we're like, we're not jump roping tomorrow, we're jump roping now. So like being able to like really just lock into your body and to be like, this is the only thing I can do right now. A lot of the sports that I like to do and activities I like to do are very much like mindful, being at the sheer end of presence. Partly because I think I love adrenaline, which a lot of ADHD folks do. But two, there's such a connection. My big ones are climbing and snowboarding. Like that's how I roll, and like both of those, you have to be dialed in. You have to be locked in at each time, and it also puts you into a flow state where your mind and body are just kind of at one. And I think that helps regulate me through, my day-to-day activity, which tends to be pretty wordy,
Yeah.
So
I love that how you said you're really present and have to be locked in, because look, if you're snowboarding and you're off somewhere else, you get hurt, man, pretty
oh yeah,
bad.
you're catching an edge and you are eating shit and it's not great.
Yes, man. I think I've always felt that same way. I think I had a draw towards poker when I was like 18 or 19, the same way. Like if I'm not locked in on poker and really present and there and in that flow state, I can lose many thousands of dollars, right? And so I think that's why I was always really attracted to the game. I journaled that not that long ago. I think that's why I always have been really into it. And I think that's why I like taking walks without my phone and just like surroundings and being really present. And the gym every day kind of does that for me too. You're thinking about that mind muscle connection, right? And those things. So it's cool to hear you say that too, and kind of affirm some of the things I kind of thought, but I didn't really know,
Yeah, and there's a science to it as well. They find that like if you try to multitask in those environments, you don't do either of them well, but not to mention you don't get as much of the mental health benefit. So like there is a whole science behind it. But I even know that like I don't take my phone to the gym. I don't do those things partly because like when I'm there, like I want to feel what it's like to feel in my body. And like, not to mention, like, there's other humans there, like, who are doing the same thing, which is super cool. Like, so much of our lives, especially if you're in the creator space, is like you're alone, like working things out and trying to like get ideas. So why invite all these other activities to actually reduce the benefits of them and by like inviting all these other things to it? I was recently told like, oh, that like I needed to read more and to learn more, and that's been on my heart, and I am doing it. But they're like, oh, just like every time you're on a run, like listen to a podcast. Every time you're in between stuff, like have Audible going. And I'm like, man, like the down spaces in our life is where creativity happens. It's where like you recharge. It's where you make connections. Like those are just as valuable. And interestingly enough, they actually are starting to have studies that are showing that like this increased use of media at every single environment that you're in is starting to mimic ADHD symptoms. So some were suggesting that the phenomena of ADHD, or like discovering you have it when you're 20, isn't so much that you actually had it earlier in life. It's just we are so in flux by different demands all the time. Our minds are like, I feel like I have to be doing things all the time, and that's like affecting normal people. And that's why I say I help ADHD-ish people, because like some you might not have had symptoms before, but like our environment now makes you have it, and we need to work for that.
That's so true. I mean, really, man, we don't have TV. We haven't had it for like 3.5 years, but I'll be at the gym warming up with cardio. And dude, there's 17 TVs. And not
Yeah.
only are there 17 TVs with 17 different things, like my mind is crazy, but then there's the news, but then you got stories going here, but then it's a breaking emergency up here. And then you got the sports over here, but they're also talking about this scores are flashing down here. You got TikTok 7 seconds, man, and that's your attention span. Like, I do feel like in this era of notifications and, I said to my wife, man, and this was very eye-opening for me, like several months ago, I said, I almost feel guilty when I have like an hour that I just like go lay in the pool and read a book, or like the kids are napping and I just like, I'm not on that grind, right? I'm not hitting the notifications and getting back to people. And I almost feel guilty about it. And I need to retrain my brain to turn off sometimes and to just be and to just rest. But our culture definitely does not promote that, right?
Nah, it's like everything has to be capitalized on. If it's not productive, then it's not good. And it's like that's not how we were designed, and that's not for how we were for most of our history. I mean, if you think about like it, like if we had met a long time ago, one would be really crazy. One, because I would have grew up in Texas, and I don't know where you grew up, but like even if you're in Nevada, like that's yeah, like you're never gonna meet.
Yeah,
That'll just never
right.
happen. Now I can be like, hey Tyler, I'm gonna buzz you on my car, drive 15 miles, which would have taken you a day ride previously, and then I'm gonna do like 7 other things in the process.
Yeah.
And whereas previously, like if I would have had to drive in the town, even where I live, like to the city center, it's like 2 or 3 miles. I would have been like riding on my horse and like thinking about the stuff I'm gonna do today and like reflecting on things that I learned. Um, if I was lucky enough to read, like or knew how to do that, like I would have read my book and I would have been reflecting on that, like as I'm doing my work throughout the day. And that's the only content I have. And sure, there was problems with that period, but I actually think that's closer to how we learn and how we actually bring these values and bring content to life is through a slower process where boredom is allowed to occur, because in boredom is where we get creative, like really creative.
Man, I can, so when I'm out of ideas or I'm sitting down to write or create, YouTube content, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Anytime I get stuck, I go for a walk. That's it. That's just my go-to, man. I'll take one of my boys, I'll push him around. I turn my mind off essentially.
Yeah.
Dude, within 15 minutes, all these things are going off, right? That's so true. And I agree with you back. I mean, man, you go back a couple hundred years. I mean, humans, we had a lot of downtime, man. I mean, really, like you'd wake up, you might, tend to your garden, go hunt, come home and eat, rest, maybe tell stories, sit around a campfire and sleep, right? You had a lot of down. Now it's like, again, we don't have 1 minute, man. And I mean, I think you see this in everyday life. Like, dude, it's sad to me. You'll see people at dinner just constantly on their phone. They're not even present. They're not even there, right? And I'm guilty of it at times for sure, man. When I've got a bunch of things or a client I need to get back to, something I'm actively working on. But you mentioned the gym. I was really proud of what happened today, man. I had a trainer at my gym, big gym, come up to me and just tap me on the shoulder and be like, hey, man, I love when you're here because I always see you interacting with everybody else. He goes, all these other guys come in here and they got their headphones on. They never talk to anybody. Dude, I'm going around giving a fist bump, telling, it's a great job. Johnny, great to get it. I'm like one of those weird guys that's like in there doing that, right? And so to me, that's the human experience, though. That's what makes life worth living, man. And, I am stuck in this like digital space all day and I'm grateful for it, the communities, but there is something to real life, man, like to get into real life is just amazing.
Yeah. And that's where we are. And I think for me, my core processes are, show up, actually just be here, because that's the only way we're meant to be, not so much in here, but actually out of our minds and into our lives. And that's what you're doing at the gym. Like you're showing up, you're there, you're not in the Twitter space. The next part is like to lean in. Like there are some parts of our lives that are actually hard and that we got to do something about, right? And it's not about avoiding discomfort. It's not about avoiding the hard stuff. It's about being connected. And, and even at the gym, like, I think one of the reasons like that we do go off into our zone, play off on our phone, it's like we've gotten so uncomfortable with like humans being around. I don't know what I'm gonna say. Maybe they're gonna be judging me. Like, oh my God, that guy just squatted like 500 pounds, and I'm like just like put two and a halves on the bar, and I don't know what I'm doing. Like as opposed to being like, wow, like we're all doing this together. Maybe I can learn from this guy. But I think we're afraid of making those small bits. So it's awesome that you're doing that. I'm sure it's a huge boost. One of the reasons that I actually love going to climbing gyms is because it's inherently a social sport. Like you need somebody like to belay you or else you would die. And so one, people are actually paying attention. Two, like we're always looking for climbing partners. And so we're inherently social. That's one reason I don't go to too many Globo gyms anymore. Like it's not that I just dislike them. It's just like I know these people are going to be a little bit more dialed in. So
how did you get into climbing, Drew? Because I have one of my best buddies here, Shane. Shout out to Shane if you watch this. I told you before we hopped on, this guy had the strongest. I mean, he weighs 30 pounds less than me. I bet I can do 20 more pull-ups than him. But dude, his grip strength, he would take 2 fingers and hang off a door and be able to do a quick pull-up or two, and it amazed me, man. And he was always trying to get me to go climbing a bunch of times, but we had 3 1-year-olds at the time. We were like best friends. It's pretty hard to get away, but how did you get into climbing? And tell me a little about that community, because it seems really fun and like a tight knit. Everybody kind of has everybody's back, man. It seems like a cool thing.
Yeah. So I've always been into nature and trying to get out there as much as I could. I'd had some experiences in the past, good experiences like with supervisors or friends who kind of invited me in when I was living in Southern California previously. And I was like, oh, this is cool. But everything was so far and expensive, so I never really did it. Crazily enough, when I moved to where I live now, everything was locked down because it was just at the beginning of pandemic. And I didn't know anyone in the city that I was in, didn't know like anyone around. And then I had one colleague who was like, I have a friend who lives in that town. Maybe he'll hang out. And it was like this one crazy guy. His name is Mike. He has long hair and like he's like the epitome of what we call a dirtbag climber. Like just like lived in a van, like smelly. But he's like, "Do you want to come with me?" I'm like, okay. And it was like, I was sitting out, it was like this, and he took me out to this beautiful rock. Like you could see Lake Tahoe, just kind of like right below us. Like there was everything, like just was peaceful. And it was like a moment where I'm like, this is just me hanging out with a good dude in nature, doing something physical where there's nothing else happening in the world. I'm like, oh, like this is so cool. So I got involved that time. And then eventually like the climbing gyms opened up. And even though it was a time when like people were still wearing masks and like, like people were afraid to like breathe on each other or be in existence, like you saw this community of like, hey, how's it going? Blah, blah, blah. And just people like asking you and like people coming up to you like, hey, do you have a buddy right now? I'm like, thanks for asking about my social life. But they're like kind of inviting you in. They're like, we have 3 people. So we'd love to like have you come and help and belay us. Like it's just naturally connecting in that way. And now I would say most of my close friends are climbers, and it's largely just people who care about their own health, want to be outside, and have this like physical, mental challenge. And yeah, it's pretty rad. Actually, randomly, a lot of psychologists are climbers. So I don't know what there's an association about that, but
An interesting study, man, to see what
yeah.
you get into. What are some of the climbs you do in nature? Are you, I know you see these guys like free solo, you watch these like crazy guys out there, but I assume you're doing it safely, right?
Yes,
Like,
yeah. No, I mean,
like,
I will do what's called lead climbing. So that's where you're putting up the rope as you go. Like kind of sport climbing in that way. I don't do the crazy free solo, no rope.
that
Uh,
stuff scares me, man. It's wild.
yeah, I want to do some like studies on the people who actually do that consistently, because I'm like, there's something that's missing there. And but yeah, no, I'm definitely like just like to chill, have fun, go outside, do rocks and boulders, and um, you know, the we go out to Yosemite really frequently. We go try to travel as much as we can. So
Nice, man. That's awesome, dude. Well, tell me a little about your nonprofit world and how you got into that, man.
yeah, so the nonprofit space we created was, and it's still running out of Southern California, but we noticed that there was a need for really good quality mental health services um, for people who, one, couldn't pay $500 an hour for therapy, but also two, like needed something that wasn't covered by insurances. So technically for an insurance base, I have to say you have depression, and that has to go into your medical record. And while we like to believe we're in a society where we don't discriminate, like that now becomes a part of your medical history, and you might have some consequences for that later. And as an ethical provider, if you don't actually have depression, I don't want to put that in your chart, where some people would do that just to get like reimbursed, because that's how it works. And so what we were seeing was a problem, like how to get really good quality services, and also services that are ethically produced. So what we were doing, well, the best way to do this is actually teach students who are doctoral students to do really good quality therapy, as opposed to waiting until they get trained later to do it. So we created a combination training / nonprofit clinic where we would give our doctoral students the highest level quality training in therapy for evidence-based practices. And then they would go out and do the work of therapy with folks who really needed it, but maybe couldn't afford it. And so it became this like virtuous cycle. So we were being able to help more people because they could see 5 or 10 people, and I could have 5 or 10 interns.
That's cool, man.
So yeah,
That's really neat. And that's still going on today?
yeah, it still happens. Still going on.
So that is a huge problem, man. And I'm obviously not going to say any names, but I know really well a guy who getting his PhD in Minnesota or Michigan, or a really cold state, right? And just suffering from really bad seasonal depression, like to the point where having not good thoughts, right? But he was already getting recruited by a lot of these Fortune 500 companies, and he just had to grind it out for basically a year to a year and a half because he said that exactly what you said. And I, when he first told me that, like, he's like, dude, I can't see a mental health counselor. Like, I won't get recruited for these jobs. I won't
Mhm.
I was like, that can't be a thing, man. And he's
Mhm.
like, dude, you don't understand, man. Like, if I go once, that's on my record forever. And like, they could
Mhm.
bring that up in a promotion meeting 15 years later. And like, I can't risk it. And I'm like thinking to myself, how sad is this, man, that we have a guy who clearly has some seasonal depression, needs some help, and society's just like, well, dude, yeah, you can get it, but it's going to
That's it.
come at a cost, you know?
Yep.
And then we wonder sometimes why people detonate or why people do the things they do when we don't have these real conversations about mental health.
Mhm.
That's always blown my mind. And my wife and I talk about this a lot where, man, you know, because we've done foster care and we've taken in a lot of kids and we've gotten to know some of the parents, and a lot of it is like they just don't have resources to get help, man. Like
Mhm.
it breaks your heart. It's super sad. And you think, you know, we're one of the richest societies maybe ever. I don't know. And we
Mhm.
don't provide basic mental health support
Yep.
for people who need it. Like to me,
Mhm.
that just breaks my heart, man. And I couldn't believe it was a thing. But to hear you say that too, I always had in the back of my head, is my buddy really making that up? But like, that's definitely a thing, huh?
Yeah, no, it's a very vicious cycle. So we have contexts that put you in lots of stress and make you suffer, and then you're feeling that suffering, but then we don't have the resources either because financially you just really don't have them, because you're in environments that's going to maybe look at your medical record, or because of stigma that still exists about mental health broadly. And so
Mhm.
then you are trapped, which makes you feel more stressed, and you're going to perform worse in those environments. And then they say, well, look at how bad you're performing. Clearly, we have the resources, but you're not choosing to do it. But like, it doesn't really become a choice at that point. And so people get locked in and trapped.
Mhm.
And it's really tragic because if we want to talk about, especially like men's mental health
Yeah,
specifically,
right.
like this is where we end up having folks who become disenfranchised. And you either through all the shootings, through
Yeah.
the suicide epidemics,
Commit suicide
or
at a 4.5 times higher clip than
yeah,
females, right? Because
yeah,
we don't
yeah.
have those spaces to talk, and we feel like,
Mhm.
yeah, if you do talk, you lose your job, you lose your status, you lose a lot of these things.
Yeah. And I also think part of that epidemic the the kind of a toxic, I'm not gonna say toxic masculinity because that's like a very different connotation, but like where men in particular get put into communities where if they have to be put in a straitjacket of what it means to be a man to deal with your own suffering.
Mm,
You can only do these things, two or three things to be okay, and
mm,
then that actually makes them feel worse. Um,
right.
and so it's a real problem, and I think people are trying to get out of it, but it's going to take some time, and it's going to take. And I actually think it's moving away from mental health being a part of the physical health system in lots of ways. I mean, partly that's why I do the stuff I do on Twitter. It's like
Mhm.
to promote like, no, this is good living. It's not just like this sickness that you have. It's how you actually become a full human. Um,
That
but
was, yeah,
yeah.
that was kind of my first thought as you started to talk about this, is you get to kind of bridge that gap almost,
Mm.
because hey, they don't have to put it on their record. If somebody
Yeah,
just comes to
yeah.
you and joins a group, and I'm even thinking about a lot of my experiences, Drew, where guys have hired me to maybe lose weight or have a better marriage or change some
Mhm.
habits around, but ultimately we're talking about a lot of the mental health issues and we're
Yeah.
starting to solve a lot of those things, right? And it is, you kind of create a safe environment that a lot
Mhm.
of guys will tell me a couple weeks in, I've never been able to talk to another person like this before, where I can just be
Mhm.
open and vulnerable and maybe say some of these things that I you know, yeah, would my boss, I can't say these to my boss. I can't say these to my wife. I can't say, I feel trapped, right?
Yeah.
And so to be able to provide a safe space like that, man, I think is really powerful, really necessary. And I really commend you a lot, man, for providing that for guys, especially because that is much, much needed, man.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think having as many positive voices and spaces that folks can go in to learn to transform and to be more than that, I think that's great. And one reason that's why I'm glad we were able to connect, because I know that's a mission that you have and you do it differently. But yes, if you are building up folks and giving them space to change and to grow and to have a bigger life, then you are doing that work too. It's just maybe different. But yeah, one of the things I do love is like, you can come to me and we can put on whatever hat we need to for a particular environment. Because we're all working towards this same goal, which is having people have a more full life, to have a better society where we're more engaged. And, call it what you want. It doesn't matter. Just that people get better.
That's right. I can't imagine if everybody had like your heart, man. Like I feel like we'd see a society just full of people doing better and a lot more empathy and meeting people where they're at and a lot more kindness and a lot more like I picture that society every day in my head, man. And you do often hear the world's going to hell in a handbasket. I always tell people, let's do something about it, and I admire you, man, for just going out there and doing something about it. Wherever you're at, man, you're going to meet people where they are. And that's awesome, man. That floods my soul, to be honest, to hear that, man.
Yeah. Well, that's what you can do. Like, I think you just start with where you are and you look at the world and you see, what can I do in this one moment to make something better? And that's how I built what I built. That's how I think you built what you built. And that's how we grow as a society.
That's beautiful, man. I love that. Well, let me ask you a couple rapid fire questions here, man. I
Cool.
always do this at the end. Let's just say somebody is listening to this right now. Let's say they're a male, and they do feel trapped. Hey, I can't really talk to anybody about this. I always feel trapped in my head. I don't feel like I'm good enough or worthy or all these things. And man, for whatever reason, it's 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. And I've been doing this for a while. What would be your first piece of advice to a guy like that who just feels sort of stuck?
Breathe. And what I mean by that, real seriously, because normally we get so, oh my God, I can't do it. Oh my God, like, and you're just in your head so much. And what breathing actually does is, one, pauses you, and makes you connect a little bit more with what's actually happening in the moment. So you're thinking that I can't do it. You're thinking that I'm stuck. You're thinking that have no possibilities. But the only thing that you're actually doing is just thinking. And so it doesn't really matter about the content, but as you can start getting some distance from it, that's helpful. And the next thing would be finding some ways to get more perspective on what you actually care about. So do these things actually even matter to you? Does it matter that you don't have 1 million followers on Twitter at this point in your life? Does that actually matter in the grand scheme of your life? Like, or does it matter that like you sometimes have messed up? Like, I'm pretty sure on your tombstone one day, it's not gonna be like, this guy made a mistake.
It's a good point, man. But we crucify ourselves every day for it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we think about what we actually wanted to say. Like, I'm Tyler. I lived with integrity. I cared about my family so much. Is that true today? Yeah. Cool. That's what I'm about, So breathe and take a moment to remember like what you're actually about.
I love that.
And if you don't know the second question, that's when we're like, okay, where do I hurt? Because you only hurt where you care. Like, if I didn't, like, for myself, like if I didn't care about people who were struggling and have ADHD, like if I was just like, it's whatever, I probably shouldn't work with them.
It's a good point, man. Right. It's a good point. I think a lot of people just chase dollars, and it seems like you really chase passion and wanting to help. And if I'm honest, man, this is my 67, 68th episode, and I've gotten to talk to a lot of people I really admire, yourself included. That is a common theme. I just want to help people. I like even getting to chat with like Zuby a couple weeks ago and on his podcast, and like he's like, yeah, I never really set out to build a global brand. I just wanted to help people. Still to this day, I just want to help people. Gia McCool got 9 million followers out there, and you ask, well, what still motivates you to go? You got money, you got fame, you got all these things. I just want to help people, And I think, man, we need more people with that kind of heart, cultivating that kind of mindset every day to wake up and say, I just want to go help people and make the world better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let me ask you another question, man. What are you reading right now, Dr. Drew? You mentioned that, hey, maybe I don't read as much. I'm a little bit with you on that. People tell me you need podcasts. I listen to a few sermons a week. I like that. And I got books on my nightstand always that I'm reading here and there, but like I'm not like one of these guys who's I'm gonna read 72 books this year, like as a vanity metric or anything like that. But do you have anything you're reading now?
Yeah, so I like to read like a nonfiction book, a fantasy book, and like kind of a spiritual values book, all the same. Like those are what I do. So the nonfiction one I'm reading right now is Anti-Fragile. And it's about how do we create a society that like isn't afraid of variability and actually like is robust to change. And so it's a very interesting critique on the way we maybe over intervene sometimes with stuff, and we say like, oh my God, you can't have any problems. um, so
Yeah.
that's one. The fiction book, I'm rereading a series. I'm gonna let my inner nerd show out of when I was like a teen. It's called The Wheel of Time. It's a fantasy fiction series about like what happens when men and women have the ability to like weave through magic and what happens when that goes astray. So it's super cool. It's a cool fantasy twist. And then the last book that I'm reading on the spiritual side, it's by an author, a former pastor named Rob Bell, and it's called Everything is Spiritual. And he talks about how everything is connected, and we're always in the ever-going participation of creation in the world. And that just really aligns with where I'm at right now and how I see things more from a psychological side. So it's really cool to connect it on the spiritual religious side.
That's cool, man. I love that, dude. Thanks for sharing that, man. I appreciate
Yeah.
it. Well, guys, I'm gonna link everything Dr. Drew Buzz below. He's a fantastic follow on Twitter. It's at Drew R Carr with 2 R's at the end, but we'll link it below. He has a fantastic newsletter too. We'll link that below. Give him a follow, give him a subscribe. I really appreciate you coming on today, man, and dropping a lot of wisdom and sharing a lot of insights with us. I want to ask you one last question, man, if you're cool with it. Well, let's just say you're ruler of the world today, right? Like you become president of the world. You get to make a couple of big changes, man. What do you think humanity can do on a this is a big question, right? But what do you think we could do, I guess, on a big level, just every day to kind of make some changes and go in the right direction?
Hmm. I am at awe at the type of responsibility that would have. Um,
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be
and,
president or king of the world, man, for sure. I like
uh,
being just a dad.
um,
Like,
giving a psychologist that much power is kind of dangerous. But I would have people um, daily be reminded of their ability to pick. And what I mean by that is, if I was a sovereign ruler, I would want people to have the freedom to be able to choose what they think is helpful to move in their own life. And so they would have to ask a question every single day. What's the thing I'm going to do today that will help me move forward in creating this bigger, bolder version of myself? And they can choose to say, I don't want to do it today, but just being introduced to the question. Because I think when people actually are honest with themselves and that question, inherently our entire world gets better.
100,000% agree with that, man. That's a beautiful thing, man. I knew you were gonna have a great answer for that. It popped in my head, and I'm like, do I want to put him on the spot? And I'm like, I think he's gonna have a great answer for that. Also, it's funny because I think that's why guys like you can't be ruler of the world, because the people that you to get ambitious enough to be president or these
Yeah.
you have to be very narcissistic and want more power and more power. But you're like, nah, I want to give it back to the people and just have them live great lives. Probably odds are you can't get ruler of the world if you got that mindset.
Exactly. Yeah.
I love that, brother. I really appreciate that, man. Well, what are your future plans, man? Where can give us a shout? Are you on Instagram, any of these other platforms or anything like that? Anywhere else people can find you, or what's the best way to get in touch with you? And then,
The
what's
best way is through Twitter. I do have an Instagram presence technically. I find it a little distracting for me to do it as a male. The Instagram is just not the best for me. But although that being said, I am hoping to get more in the podcasting and visual space. That's going to be coming in 2023. It's just getting all the ducks in a row to do that.
I love that, man. That's cool. I'll be on the lookout for that, man.
Awesome.
If I can help in any way, let me know too, man. Because
I appreciate that.
I don't know what I'm doing, but I wake up every day and just try and get a little bit better at what I'm doing. So it's, I can probably share a lot of mistakes I've made on the way, if nothing else.
I appreciate that.
Awesome. Well, guys, thanks so much for tuning in, man. I hope you guys have enjoyed this as much as I have. This is Dr. Drew. I really love this guy. I make it a point to get to his page on Twitter constantly. He puts out some fire threads that just really make you think and challenge you the way that you think, and just shares a lot of knowledge. And I appreciate you coming on here, man, and making us all better today. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I appreciate it, man. Well, guys, this has been Tyrompers No Limit Podcast, episode number 68. You go have the greatest day of your life. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to everybody you encounter today. Let's go change the world one random act of kindness at a time. God bless, baby. Let's go get it.